here tonight to talk to Rick about his brand new book, The Red Pyramid. How many of you have a copy of that? Anyone already read it? Did you tear through it already? Yeah? Well, I've had a chance to read it, and it's real good. I want to start, actually, because today is the first day that it's been published, right? So I want to start by talking to Rick and asking him a little bit about it, just so that we have a little context, we know what this one's going to be about. Sort of like, I guess, an elevator pitch. You know, if you're in an elevator, you've got like just a couple of floors, you've got like 30 seconds or a minute to tell somebody a really great idea. So Rick, why don't we pretend that you're in an elevator with 700 kids, and they ask you, hey, what's your new book about?
Egypt.
Okay, so...
Well, if we're going a few more floors. Basically, it's about Carter and Sadie Kane, brother and sister, 14 and 12. There's a magical accident that happens that unleashes the ancient gods of Egypt into the modern world. Carter and Sadie find out, for reasons they've never suspected before, that they are the only ones who can set things right. They are descended from ancient Egyptian magicians, and only they can control the gods.
Sounds good. So, here we are. Last time it was the ancient Greeks, and here we are with Egypt. What do those two things have in common? What is your interest in mythology? And I'm particularly interested in when it began. Did you read myths as a child, or was this later in life?
I've always loved myths, ever since I can remember. We were talking backstage about comic books, and I see a lot of really common ground between superheroes and the Greek gods. I think in a way, the Greek gods and the Egyptian gods, to a lesser extent, were sort of our first superheroes. In fact, I was doing a talk at a school once, and I asked the kids what their favorite Greek god was. My favorite answer ever was the girl who raised her hand and said, Batman! Because, you know, I can really see the connection there. But I've always loved myths, I've always loved fantasy. I don't know, there's something about those stories that is timeless. There's magic, there's monsters, there's excitement, heroes, villains, everything you can wish for. The Greeks are better known, but the Egyptian stories are just as cool and just as interesting. And the gods of Egypt are just amazing. They do have a lot of similarities to the Greek gods, but they also have a lot of fun differences. It's really fun to do the Red Pyramid and kind of compare and contrast the different gods.
Well, you do a really, really great job at it. I mean, the stories are timeless, but you do such a great job at pulling them into the present, you know, and making us feel like that person over there could be a demigod, or that person over there, you know, there's something going on. And one of the things that I noticed when I read this book was that we are in a different place here. We're talking about Egypt. There's definitely a different story going on, and different rules of magic, and all these really fantastic things. But there's a bit of a hint that maybe there's, I like to call it the Riordan verse, that maybe there's a shared world going on here. Maybe just over the river something's going on with the Greeks. I mean, could you talk a little bit about that? Was I correct in picking up on that, or am I just crazy?
No, you're not crazy. There is a scene in the book where, for instance, they're sailing up the East River on this magical boat, and the kids, Carter and Sadie, look at their Uncle Amos, and they say, why do you live in Brooklyn? And he says, well, it's an old tradition in Egypt that you live on the east side of the river because that's the rising sun side. That's where the living live. Only the dead live in the west. And Sadie says, well, does that mean you can't live in Manhattan? Amos thinks for a minute. He says, Manhattan has other problems. Other gods. It's best that we stay separate.
Speaking of the kids in the book, the two heroes, Carter and Sadie, you know, I thought it was fascinating, for one, because this book has actually two point of view characters. We have Carter, and then we have his sister Sadie. And while Carter is an absolutely stand-up and enjoyable hero, I have to admit that I just really liked Sadie. Could you talk a little bit why you decided in this book to include Carter's sister as another protagonist?
Yeah, I do like Sadie because she is probably one of my favorite characters that I've ever created. And I didn't really anticipate that necessarily. I knew I wanted to do Carter and Sadie's point of view because if you guys have brothers or sisters, you ever argue with them a lot? And Carter and Sadie are like that through the whole book. And they're arguing back and forth like, well, no, that's not the way it happened. Here, on my tell you what really happened. So they're sort of taking turns through the story. I didn't anticipate Sadie really the way her voice would be, but she's fiery. I mean, she's got a lot of character, and she's very, very funny too. She was raised in London. Carter is just this American kid. He was homeschooled. He's been all around the world, so he doesn't have like a traditional school background, but he's got a very American point of view. Sadie was raised by her maternal grandparents in London. So she has always thought of herself as British. She has a British accent. She sees things in that light. And so Carter and Sadie don't really get along very well. So I really wasn't sure, how was I going to do a first-person 12-year-old girl who's British? Because that's something that I have never been. But then I thought about it. Where she came from was actually my mom. She was raised in London. And she was raised as a British school child until she was a teenager. And when she came back to America, she was lost. She had a British accent. She didn't understand American high school at all. And so she was kind of caught between those two cultures. And that's kind of what Sadie's based on.
You really got it. I would never have known that you've never been a British girl. Because the chapters are just fantastic. Because she's so entertaining. And there's, it's actually interesting. There's quite a different relationship in this book between these heroes, these kids, and the gods, the Egyptian gods, right? It's not really the demigods and half-bloods here. And I was fascinated by the way that magic works. There's a very complex and cool system of magic in this book, but it must have just taken so much research. Or do you just have the stuff floating in your head and you just can't wait to get it out? How'd that work?
No, it did take a lot of research. I mean, as I was going around for Percy Jackson and talking to kids all around the country, they would always ask me to do another mythology someday as well. And Egypt was very, very popular with my students when I was a classroom teacher. I knew that that was potentially a really, really interesting thing to write about. So I knew a lot about Egypt, but I didn't know about their magic. I didn't know, for instance, really, that's where magic started. That's one of the oldest civilizations to develop the idea of magic. And in the ancient world, everyone knew that the best magicians were in Egypt. That was just understood. If you wanted really good magic, you had to go to Pharaoh's court. And so I started researching that, and I found out about the House of Life, which is the oldest school of magic in the world. Every temple in Egypt had a branch of the House of Life. They would train magicians to do various things. This is a real thing. And so I started thinking, what would it be like if the House of Life was still around? And it was still training magicians to summon the power of the gods, and even when necessary, fight the gods. Because that's one thing that magicians